We got that up there. Well, good evening. It's good to see you back again. And I want to know how people did this week. Anyone noticing downward trends in blood sugars? Yes? Yes? Very good.
Good.
All right, how about, pardon me? 95. Give him a hand.
Good.
That's wonderful. Yeah, when you can see it go from 180 down to 95, it's just like, yes! That's a breath of fresh air. Yes, ma'am.
My blood sugar one day was 160 something.
Uh-huh.
And I walked, and when I got back, I tested, and I was 188.
Yeah, no, that sometimes happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't worry about that, because
So let's repeat her question.
Okay, what she was
comment.
saying, she was making a comment that she went out and walked. Her blood sugar was 160 something, and she walked and came back, and it's 180. So, it's actually gone up. That can happen, and what happens is sometimes you get the liver to release sugar, release glucose, but the problem is you're still insulin resistant. You haven't gotten rid of the insulin resistance problem yet. And so you've released the blood sugar into your bloodstream, but it hasn't gone into the cells because you can't get it there because of the insulin resistance. What should you do in that instance? Well, what you need to be doing is you need to be doing more burst training. Because if you do the burst training, if you do it 3 times a week over the course of a month, it's about equal to a metformin tablet. It can drop your insulin resistance by about 26%. So that's one of the strategies of what you can do. The other thing that will really help you out is if you start doing the intermittent fasting. And with intermittent fasting, you eat breakfast, 6 hours later you eat lunch, but you don't eat again until the following morning. And during the night, your blood sugar is going to go up because your intestines get empty. You send a hormone to the liver, says, yeah, it says there's no food down here. We need you to give up some of what your glucose stores. When you do that repeatedly, then what happens is over a period of time, a few weeks usually, then your blood sugar will begin to normalize and your fasting sugar in the morning will return to normal. And
because
intermittent fasting is one of the fastest ways that you can make that happen.
Because you're defatting the liver when that happens, when it has to give up some of that stored energy, then it's getting it out of the liver.
Now, most of the time what happens is the doctor will say, well, in order to keep your blood sugar down, you just need to eat a bedtime snack.
We're going to talk about this another night.
He's focused on the blood sugar. We are focused on what happens. Yes. And so we want that to happen. We want it to defat the liver. We don't want you to be 300 or 400 for a long time. We want you to really work on getting that down. Work with your doctor, get that down. But that's what other people do to bring the blood sugars down pretty quickly. Okay, how about fiber goals? How many people made 50 grams a day this week? Yes. Very good. Yes again. Good job, guys. Happy for that. That's wonderful. And how about water goals? How many people? Yes. Good. Very.
So heavy tonight.
Well,
She says she's so heavy tonight because she had to finish drinking her water when she got here so she could say she met that goal, and then she goes and steps on the scale. She was not happy with that.
The good news is that by next week, you're just going to have a double reward, right?
I hope so.
You're going to lose the extra weight, which is water, and you're...
I'm going to wear lighter clothes.
Maybe it'll be warm again so you can.
Maybe,
Are we going to have a computer?
maybe so. Yeah, well...
So we have no notes.
Yeah, no, we have no... Well, I can open it up. Okay.
Okay. I get nervous because I have stuff to present, and where's my notes? My cheat notes are on the computer. Yes, we have a screen up here, which is wonderful, and we can see it, but there's no notes.
Let me fix her up.
Anyway, yes.
Other goals.
Okay, yes. How are you doing on marking your books? Are you, look at this. This is all marked? Yours is all marked? Good. A little bit? A little bit? Okay. Well, keep doing it, because what we want is we want you to get in the habit of looking at your goals and saying, am I meeting it or am I not? We don't mind if you put no, today I didn't go walking, or today I didn't drink all my water. But what we do want is we want you looking at it so it will remind you. And that way later you can go, oh yes, I do need to be walking.
If you're committing to that list, your SMART goals every day, it sets them in your subconscious, and it helps you when you're facing those multiple decisions a day, and it's those little decisions that is really going to have a big impact in the future. So tonight we're going to be talking about proteins that heal, and our verse says, he healed many that were sick of diverse diseases. Well, we can tell you about how other people are reversing diabetes, but I believe ultimately it's God who is the healer and heals us from all diseases. So if you'll indulge me again, I'd like to have a prayer for you guys. Lord, I just thank you for the progress that's being made. Thank you for the decisions that are being made multiple times a day. And I pray that you will just continue to bless these people with healing. Thank you for the blood sugars going down. Thank you for the blood pressures that are going down. Thank you for the weight and that is improving. And just pray that you will continue to be with people, help them to achieve their goal. I pray for healing for them. In Jesus' name, amen.
So, again, we're only teaching you, we're educating you, but it is up to your doctor to work with you and help you. Stay in contact with them unless you fired them, and then you got to find someone else that can help you. But we want you to work with them. They're the ones that ultimately manage your health along with you. And so tonight, our learning objectives. At the conclusion of this lecture, participants will be able to...
You'll be able to describe the relationship between animal protein and type 2 diabetes. You'll be able to identify the proteins that heal, and you will be able to compare the effect of animal protein versus plant proteins and state how protein affects diabetes health.
So when Joe came to the diabetes seminar, he had had diabetes already for 20 years, type 2 diabetes. He had learned about Neil Bernard's program, How to Reverse Type 2 Diabetes. He was getting familiar with that. They'd read the book. And they learned about our program the second week. They came the second week. And when they came in, he was not feeling well at all. His A1C was still 10.7. With an A1C of 10.7 and all the medications he was on, his blood sugar was still running 300. That week, after he had been to the first program, he was hospitalized with what they thought was bronchitis. And while he was in the hospital, they realized that he actually was in congestive heart failure. And if you remember from very early in the seminar, like the first night, Steve talked about all the different diseases that are diabetes drives kidney trouble and eye trouble and heart trouble, and a lot of the diabetics have a lot more incidence of cancer. Well, that was his situation. He had an ejection fraction of 15%. That means he basically was able to get up to the bathroom, to feed himself, but he couldn't do anything else. He absolutely had no energy. He wasn't able to because his heart was functioning in such a low capacity. When they when they did they
Echo?
actually,
Heart catheterization.
they did a heart cath, that's right. They did a heart cath and discovered he had 2 blocked arteries, but that had been that way for a while, and so he had collateral or new circulation around those blocked arteries, and that's how he had been functioning. He had sleep apnea, and though he had a normal BMI, which is the body mass index, though he had a normal, you can see there that he had additional, his weight was right here. And that's very indicative, even though his BMI was normal. He was on several medications, and his physician had mentored under Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn from the Cleveland Clinic. Does that ring a bell with some of you? Okay, so his physician called Dr. Esselstyn. Now, Dr. Esselstyn was retired at this point, but he was really interested in Joe's story. And so he called and talked to Joe and his wife, Sherry, for 30 minutes. And she was furiously taking notes of everything he said. But one of the things that he said over and over in the conversation with Joe and Sherry was no oil. Absolutely no oil. Not a drop of oil. No nuts, no seeds that are high in oil, none of that. And so he was also told not to exercise because of his ejection fraction being so low. So he got better. He got out of the hospital. He came back to the seminar. He was very restless. His color was terrible. And his wife was almost tearful. She was really struggling because Joe was so sick and he wasn't able to do the things that we encouraged everyone to do, like burst training and the walking after meals and whatever. But I just took her and I held her and I said, it's okay. He's very sick. Well, we finished up the program. We had a 6-month follow-up. And before I called them to tell them about the follow-up meeting, I checked the obituaries because I wasn't sure that he would have survived. But I didn't find it, so I was a little hesitant, but I called her, and she was cheerful and shared how much better he was doing. And he came back to the meeting, and after, this was a little bit later, this was not at the 6-month follow-up, but a little bit later after that. His A1C was down to 6.4. His blood sugar was 113. He had another heart cath. His ejection fraction was up. I believe this was 1.5 years after the original. It was up to 45 to 50%. That is amazing, folks. That is amazing. The sleep apnea was totally gone. He had lost 26 pounds. He was off of several of his medications, was still on metformin, and at this point, he was still on no exercise. He did this totally by diet alone. He has been amazing. Another thing about Joe, this has been 5 years. He's now 75. The 5th of May, he will have his 76th birthday. Is that your birthday too?
May 7th, I'm going to be 75.
Oh, well, good for you. She's going to be 75 May 7th. But for Joe, he is the first gentleman in his family, his dad, his brothers, whatever, to reach 70. So it's a blessing. They feel like the Lord has given them extra time, extra life. Joe still has some challenges. He's not totally off of medicines, but he is doing so much better, and I just praise the Lord for it.
Gutta says, we are best at hiding those things that are in plain sight. And I say that, and Dr. Joel Foreman says, nothing is so hidden as the untold story of protein. Well, so let's talk about protein. One of the things that I'm asked frequently is what are good sources of protein? How much protein do you need? Should it be plant proteins or animal proteins? How do you get a good quality protein? What kind of supplements do I need to take? What kind of protein should I add to my smoothie? What are the best sources? What kind of impact do proteins have on diabetes? Well, one of the first things we need to address is that in the United States of America, we have a cultural bias toward protein. One of the things that we do is we believe that meat on the table equals prosperity. And we believe that if you're rich, then you eat meat. And if you are poor, you eat plant foods. And we also believe that if you eat plant foods, then you're lazy because you don't have the energy to get up and go out and drag it home. So none of that is true. Dr. T. Colin Campbell and his son have done some amazing work. Dr. Campbell has spent his life work studying lifestyle and disease. And the crowning achievement of his work is this book called The China Study. Now, it was copyrighted in 2006. It's 18 years ago, and it's still in print. I mean, you can still get it today. It's an excellent, excellent read, especially the first half of the book. And what he's writing about is what was called the China-Oxford-Cornell Diet and Health Project, which later on became known simply as the China Study. And at that time, China was the only place left in the world where people lived, died, and ate what was grown within a 50-mile radius of home. But with the changes of technology, roads were being built, infrastructure was being built up, and they were becoming a very industrialized nation. So things were changing quickly. The United States of America and the People's Republic of China joined in a joint project to study peoples from different districts of China. And China had just recently reported on a cancer study, a cancer atlas. They made this atlas of different counties in the People's Republic of China. And one of the things that they realized when they made this study was that there were differences in cancer rates from county to county, sometimes as much as 400%. And so they say, why is the cancer rate so different in these areas? So they selected counties that had these big differences in cancer rates, and they went into them and began their study there. Because it was widely believed at that point in time that cancer was caused because of protein deficiency. They had studied the diets of various countries around the world, and they made the assumption, because they made the observation first, that cancer rates varied by country, and the countries that had the highest cancer rates had the lowest protein intake. So they believed that it was a protein deficiency that caused the cancer, the high cancer rates. So there was this, some of you may remember back during the 1960s, we had a global effort going on to end world hunger. And what their main focus was they wanted to increase the protein content of the diet, because they thought that would not only end world hunger, but that would take care of these cancer programs. Well, Dr. T. Colin Campbell graduated in 1959 with his doctorate in nutrition, and he began working as part of this global effort to end world hunger. And he soon found himself in the Philippines, and what they were trying to do was increase the protein content of the diet. It was not a big problem near the coastal areas. Roads were not good at that point in time, but they could still get fish from the sea to about 50 miles inland before the fish spoiled. And so if they had to go further inland than that, then they had to seek alternative protein sources. And they found their answer in peanuts. The problem with peanuts, if peanuts don't get dried well, they will mold. And the mold contains a toxin that's called aflatoxin. It's the most carcinogenic substance known to man. And it grows on uncured peanuts. It also grows on uncured corn. So when you harvest your corn, when you harvest your peanuts, you want to get them into elevators. They have heaters in them or dehydrators or some kind of way that will dry that food on down so that that doesn't mold. Well, that can be a problem in a tropical area where humidity is a problem and there's lots of rain. Well, it was about this time that Dr. Campbell read an article in an obscure scientific journal from India. And it was talking about a study that was done with rats. And they thought they knew that liver cancer was caused because of protein deficient diet. And they took these rats and they injected the rats with the aflatoxin, and then they fed the rats a high protein diet and a low protein diet. Now what they expected would be that the rats that had the high protein diet would have the lowest cancer rates. And what they found out was just the opposite. The rats that had the 5% protein diet had almost no cancer. But the rats that had the 20% diet, they had rip-roaring cancer rates. And he said, how can that be? Because that flew in the face of everything that we thought we knew at that time about cancer. Well, it just so happened there was a doctor in the Philippines. They came to him and made an observation. He said, it's the wealthiest families that have the highest rate of liver cancer in children in the Philippines. And he said, well, how can that be? Because of all people, they can afford a high protein diet. And so it was around that time as well that his mother-in-law back in the United States came down with cancer. So they moved back to the United States so his wife could be with her mother in her final months of living. And he decided at that point in time that he was going to change the focus of his career. He wanted to study cancer for the rest of his life. And so he joined himself up with Cornell University, and the first thing he did is he put his laboratory assistants to work repeating this study. And so they did just that. And he got the same results. And so he said, well, we need to change this up a little bit. So what let's do, let's inject a high dose of the aflatoxin, and then we'll feed those rats a very low protein diet. Because the high dose is going to grow cancer. And we're going to inject other rats with a very low dose of carcinogen, and we're going to feed them a high protein diet. And what they did, and you can see the results. Those that were injected with the high amount of aflatoxin should have had rip-roaring cancers, almost zero. Almost zero when they were fed a low-protein diet. And those that were fed the 20% protein diet, even though they had a very minuscule dose of the aflatoxin, they developed rip-roaring cancers, tumors everywhere. So he said, well, at what rate does this happen? And so they changed things up a little bit more. And what they found was the lowest they could get their protein content in food was 4%. I mean, plants, every plant, it's part of the structure of plants. They contain protein. Celery has protein. There's more protein per calorie in broccoli than there is in steak. Some plants have high levels of protein. So how do you account for this? So what they did is they got the protein just as low as they could. And they fed them low protein diets, and they had almost no cancer rates. They went to 6%. Again, almost no cancer rate. They went to 8%. The rate crept up a little bit. They went to 10%. It crept up a little bit more. They went to 12%. And when they did, it more than doubled the cancer rate. When they went to 14%, it blew the top off. And 20%, the cancer rates were higher still. And as we've done multiple studies and looked at how much protein do people really need in order to live a healthful life, yeah, it's pretty low. And actually, the 10% protein is plenty adequate. Now, in our American diet, we have a diet of about 20 to 24% protein. So, we could easily cut that in half. Well, they kept studying this, and what they discovered is ultimately when you look at the biology of proteins, there are two groups of proteins that behave differently. But all the proteins that come from a plant source behave one way. All the proteins that come from an animal-based source behave another way. And so as you increase your intake of animal proteins, the corresponding rates of diseases go up. And when you increase plant proteins in the diet, there is no corresponding increase in disease. If you increase animal protein, well, we have to take the foods the way nature makes them. So if nature produces animal proteins with saturated fats, you're going to have high levels of saturated fats if you eat high levels of animal proteins. And it has no dietary fiber, and it's low in antioxidants, and it's also low in vitamins. On the flip side, plant proteins are low in poly and mono unsaturated fats. So it's some of the better fats than the saturated fats. We learned about that last time. And it also is associated with high levels of dietary fiber. We've learned how important dietary fiber is to reversing diabetes. So this is looking better. And it's also associated with high levels of antioxidants and vitamins. It just so happens the way nature nature grows things. If you eat the high fiber foods, you're also eating high nutrient foods, especially if you gravitate to, number one, the green leafy vegetables, and number two, the colorful vegetables. And then fruits come in closely after that. But we'll learn more about that in a little bit. So, they decided that they wanted to know about other diseases, so they kept studying the protein content of the diet, but they started looking at other cancers. Now, they had been looking specifically at first at liver cancer, but they broadened that and they found the same hockey stick effect. You see how it looks like a hockey stick going up there? The same hockey stick effect on the graph happened with ovarian cancers, colon cancers, prostate cancers. It happened with cardiovascular disease, so we're talking about heart attacks and strokes and things like that. It happened with osteoporosis, the problem with the bones that especially elderly people, especially women, suffer with, diabetes, hypertension, and dementia. So diabetes, hello guys. As you vary the protein content of the diet, if you're increasing the animal protein content of the diet, you're increasing your risk of diabetes. Well, we know in science we don't take the word of one individual. to, as gospel truth. We want to see multiple studies that reflect the same kind of thing. And so as I was writing this lecture, I just filled the lecture full of all kinds of studies, and suddenly I found out my lecture was an hour and a half, 2 hours long, and it's just like, I can't do this. But I wanted everybody to know that there are multiple studies. So I went back and I deleted most of those studies that I had gotten there. Just take it from me, there are hundreds of studies. But I picked some of the largest ones. When we're looking at scientific truth, take for instance a cancer. Somebody might say, well, I got pancreatic cancer, for instance, and I drank carrot juice and I was healed of my pancreatic cancer. Does that mean that carrot juice heals cancer? No. It means you got cancer, you drank carrot juice, and you got over your cancer, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the carrot juice was the thing that made your cancer better. But when you take, say, 7,000 people, or you take 100,000 people that have cancer, new to cancer diagnosis, and if you feed them carrot juice and 70% of them get over cancer as opposed to a control group that didn't drink the carrot juice, well, now what do we know? We know that carrot juice would help cancer, right? Now that's just hypothetical. That's not true. But when we look at science, I want to look at the large studies, because the large studies tell us something that the small studies, or anecdotal evidence as we call it, does not. So let's look at this. They looked at red and processed meats. The Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health looked at 442,000 participants and followed them for a period of 14 to 28 years. And during that period of time, 28,000 of that 400,000 developed diabetes. And so they looked at those people specifically. And what they found out is when they ate 100-gram serving more of red meats or processed meats, it increased the risk of diabetes by 19%. Now, how much is 100 grams?
And that's a day.
That's per day. That's a deck of cards. That's a pretty small serving, isn't it? Thin? That's not much. But that much, 19%, it increases your risk of diabetes. Or if you cut that stack of cards in half, that much would raise it 51% if you were eating processed meats. Now, what are we talking about there? Hot dogs? Come on, help me out. Salami, bologna, sausages? Yes. So when you're eating those processed meats, that half a deck of cards, more a day.
Beef sticks would be in that too.
Beef sticks would be in that too. Jerky would be in that too. So 51%. The recommendation to the U.S. Government by the advisory committee was that people just stop eating processed meats. They said, no, we can't say that to the American public. We can just advise them to decrease it. But, the processed meats are really difficult. Now, here's one of the things that they also discovered in this study. They discovered if you will substitute one serving of red meat a day with nuts, that would lower your risk of diabetes 21%. So just instead of one serving of meat, you just substitute nuts. Or if you substituted it with low-fat dairy, you got a 17% reduction in your risk of diabetes. And if you put in whole grains, you would reduce your diabetes by 23%. So it's just little things that can make a big difference. Am I death on all meats?
So what would it do if you substituted, say, for beans instead of nuts?
Well, there have been studies that have done on that, and right over the top of my head, I'm not remembering that. I think I have a study here that talks about some beans coming up.
Her question, repeat her question.
Okay, what she was asking was well, how much does beans change that? All right, let's go back. I'm hitting the wrong button here. All right. So here's some more on substitution. In 38,000 people in a study, one of the things they discovered that every 5% of calories you increase in your diet from animal protein sources, there's a corresponding 30% increase in your risk of diabetes. That's not very much. That's not very much. So 5%, if you substitute 5% animal protein with a vegetable protein, this is where your beans would come in, there's a 23% reduction in the risk of type 2 diabetes. And 5% increase in the meat intake corresponded to a 34% increase in likelihood of type 2 diabetes. So that's about the size of 100 gram a day. A portion of animal protein is about the size of a quarter pounder. So when you, what we're talking about is that kind of serving size, a quarter pounder. That's not a very big thing. No, it's not a very big helping. All right, now there was another study that was...
Just get you started.
There you go. I understand.
Repeat that for the online.
Okay, what he says is a quarter pounder just gets you started. So, yes. All right, this study was called the Adventist Health Study. Is there anybody here that is signed up to be part of the Adventist Health Study? Oh, we do have one participant. Very good. Now, the U.S. government likes to study Adventists. They started this in Southern California around Loma Linda University with the first Adventist Health Study. And this is Adventist Health Study 2. And the reason why Adventists have a belief that their bodies are the temple of the Holy Ghost, and therefore they ought to treat them the very best way possible. And so they tend to be very health conscious. For the most part, they don't use alcohol. It's good for the brain, yes. They don't use tobacco products. And those are two big things that we have to control for when we're studying health in the general population. And so that immediately eliminates that variable. And then they tend to exercise more, and so their lifestyle is much better. Now, when you look at them, right here, if you were to look at the general population, the general population's number would put it up about the level where the white diabetes prevalence is. That would be the general population. So even the Adventists that eat meat just like the rest of the population, they have a better diabetes rate, and we think it's because of their health orientation. But Adventists are a real diverse people. Their diet is very diverse. There's some that are semi-vegetarians. They eat meat twice a week, typically. And then there's others that only eat fish, so we call them pesco-vegetarians. And then there's lacto-ovo. The ovo, they don't eat meat, but they eat dairy, cheese, the eggs, things like that. And then there's people that are vegan that don't eat any animal-based. So when you look at the prevalence of the rate of diabetes in this population, in this particular study, and it involved 60,000 people. So you're not alone. 60,000 people. They're continuing to follow them, and they will follow them basically for the rest of their lives. And what they discovered is as the animal protein content of the diet is decreased, the prevalence of diabetes also decreases. Another study.
Also the cancer decreases.
Yes, absolutely, and a lot of other diseases too that we're not including in this lecture. But anyway, the effect of high protein diets on coronary blood flow. It was really interesting to me. R.M. Fleming in the year 2000 did this study using SPECT scans to directly measure blood flow. And what he did is he compared two different diets. One was a whole food plant-based diet, which is one of the things that I advocate here. And the other one was a low-carb, high-protein diet. So we're talking a diet something like the Atkins diet or the South Beach diet or the paleo diet would fit into that kind of category. And what he discovered was as they, when they, on the whole food plant-based diet, it increased blood flow by 40%. The low carbohydrate, high protein diet, on the other hand, decreased blood flow by 40%. Now, if you'll remember from our very first lecture, we talked about people with diabetes. 86% of the people with diabetes have cardiovascular disease. That is because the same inflammation that causes diabetes also causes heart disease. Okay? 60% of those people will die of cardiovascular events. So with that being the case, these people with diabetes are a very high-risk population. Do I want to recommend to them a diet that is going to make their circulation through the arterioles, through the capillary beds, do I want to make that worse by 40%? No, that would increase their death rate significantly. So one more reason why I think whole food plant-based is a real good idea. Back to red meat consumption and diabetes. In this particular study, they reevaluated the health habits of people every 4 years. And they did this. They did this by giving them an extensive questionnaire, and then they compared the questionnaire. And one of the things that they discovered is if in the subsequent 4-year interval, the diet changed to increase the intake of red meat by half a serving a day, they had a corresponding 48% increase in the risk of diabetes. But if they decreased the red meat consumption by half a serving a day, there was a 14% decrease in the rate of diabetes. So even just very small adjustments in your diet can have huge implications. Now, 14% reduction is wonderful, but a 48% increase, not a good idea at all. It's one of the reasons why I beg people with diabetes. They need to lose weight, but I beg them, please don't do the paleo diet because they're increasing their risk of dying. They're increasing their risk of long-term diabetes. And we need to look at the underlying causes and what we're really doing here. Now, there is an advisory committee that meets every 5 years in the United States. And they review all the scientific literature that has been put out in the previous 5 years. And then they make recommendations to Congress as to how food policies should change. Now, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, I believe it was in 2012, sued the FDA because their board was made up of people that were representing very heavily the meat lobbying organizations. And they were not reflecting the changes in the scientific literature that had happened. So they won that, and the board was restructured with people who did not represent the lobbying organizations. In 2015, when their recommendations came out, they made some profound changes in what their recommendations were for. And these recommendations govern what happens in the military, in the school system, in any government-based organization, hospitals, that are funded by federal dollars and things of that nature. And when 2020 rolled around, they reviewed the scientific literature and they said there is no significant change from the 2015 recommendations. So the 2015 recommendations still stands, and that's what I'm referencing here when I read this. But it says,
Steve, advance your slide. No, your hand one.
oh, excuse me. Yes, I'm sorry.
And this is Mary and Francis' study.
Oh, excuse me. All right, well, we'll come back to that. Let me back up a little bit. Marian Franz was a certified diabetes educator, and she was bringing out the point that just because we think something is high protein doesn't necessarily mean that it is. So she had a chart that I felt was fairly impressive, and she shows here how much calories in the food you get as protein and how much calories you get as fat. So you can see a low-fat meat, such as shrimp, for instance. You get 28 calories. 20,
Your hand one.
yes, thank you. All right. Let's see. Well, she says, first of all, health professionals often call these foods protein, but are they really protein? Certainly they all contain protein, but most foods that contain protein also contain fat, and a few also contain carbohydrates. So here we go to the graph that she has. So low-fat meat like shrimp, 28 calories in a serving from protein, and 27 calories from fat. So you can see that even in a low-fat meat, it's very
Has a lot of fat.
it has a lot of fat in it. So look down at, for instance, beef bologna. You get 12 calories in your beef bologna from protein, but you have 75 calories from fat. And 1 ounce cheese. Now this is like 1 slice of American cheese would be 1 ounce. 28 calories from protein, but how much from fat? Okay? So now let's go to plant-based stuff. Almonds, for instance. 1 ounce of almonds. You get 22 calories from protein, and we know almonds are high-protein foods, right? We think we do. But they're also high-fat. 131 calories from fat in those almonds. Yes?
Doesn't matter what kind of fat it is, because the fat in nuts is different than fats in meats.
Right, right, right. It does matter, and what matters more is that it's the matrix that nature puts it in that is the important part. So when you start refining your foods and you take the fiber out, then it changes the nature of what you're working with. When you refine it and say for instance you do an almond butter, but you add a hydrogenated fat to it to keep the oils from separating, or peanut butter, you do the same thing with peanut butter. You hydrogenate some of the fats to keep the oils from separating. Then we have to go back to last week's lecture about fats, and you're getting the hydrogenated fats, which make diabetes worse. So it really does matter, some of these things.
So those almonds, they're not going to have that effect on the arteries, of blocking the arteries, like the fat that's in the meat product?
That's correct, especially the processed meats. The processed meats not only contain the saturated fats, some of them contain the trans fats. And when you fry your meats, for instance, or when you fry your vegetables in oil, and I missed this in last week's lecture, and one of our physicians pointed it out to me. When you heat those fats, it changes the nature of some of the fats that are there into, you have a higher percentage of, it changes them into partially hydrogenated fats. And when you continue to refry in the same oil, every time you heat the oil, you increase the content of the partially hydrogenated fats. So, you know, if you're going to fry, you need to discard your oil after you fry so you don't continually raise that temperature. But anyway,
I was going to ask you about a nut when you roast a nut. You know, a lot of peanut butters and different nut butters are roasted.
right.
That effect on the fat in relationship to just eating the raw.
That's a very good question, and I don't specifically right now off the top of my head know the scientific answer to that. We can look it up and see if we can find out the answer to that. That is a good question. I do know that there are health people out there that say that raw nuts are better for you than the roasted nuts, and that may be the reason. But that would only be conjecturing. I don't know of a scientific study that says that. Yes, let's listen to the dietitian on that one.
Well, the roasted nuts, oftentimes they put oils on them,
Yes, that's true.
and of course salt. So raw is no salt, no fat added, so that's the benefit of that.
Okay, good.
Repeat that. For
Okay,
me.
so our dietitian says that when you roast the nuts, they're often roasted in oils, and then you have added salts. So that's one of the downsides of eating them roasted. Yes, ma'am.
To me, you have to look at your packages of nuts, because so many, probably even up to 80 or more percent of packages of nuts have added oils.
Oh, yes. Look at the packages, she says, of oil, of nuts, because a lot of them have added oils that are added to them. So, yes. Okay, now let's move on to what they said in the scientific committee, the Scientific Advisory Committee. They said in 2015, scientific advances provide a wealth of new evidence to identify several key dietary priorities for cardiometabolic health. These include food-based priorities for more fruits, non-starchy vegetables, nuts, legumes, fish, vegetable oils, yogurt, and whole grains, and fewer processed meats and foods higher in refined carbohydrates and salt. That's your U.S. government that's talking. It says red meats should be minimized to prevent diabetes mellitus. We're talking type 2 diabetes here. Butter used occasionally but not emphasized, and other foods, for example, unprocessed poultry and eggs, consumed in moderation. Harmful additives. Listen to this list. These are harmful additives. In particular, sodium. What's another name for sodium? Salt. Very good. Trans fat. So what's that?
partially
Hydrogenated vegetable shortening. And added sugar, a harmful additive, will generally be lower in such diets and must be further minimized through strong policy actions. Wow. That's a new day in the United States of America. So, take-home message. We're studying about proteins that heal. What are the proteins that heal? Well, it actually happens to be plant-based proteins. So we need to eat less than 10% of our calories from animal protein. So the next time you go through McDonald's drive-thru and you order that quarter pounder, you cut it in half and save half for another meal. When you go to the grocery store and you buy that container of yogurt that you're used to eating, you eat half of it, put the lid back on, and save it for another meal. Next time you get the steak, you cut it in half, and you put that in your take-home package. Or you share it with somebody. Okay? So cut your animal protein in half. And then let's increase the amount of plant-based proteins in the diet. Now, the average American, I already mentioned once, but the average American eats a little greater than 20% protein in the diet. So we are eating about twice too much animal protein. So that's why I say you need to cut it in half and get more of your proteins from plants, fruits, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. So the proteins that heal are vegetable proteins. And
So you don't need to worry about too much of that protein? In plant-based, you can eat as much as you want?
in plant-based, you can eat just as much as you want. Just as much as you want. You can eat till you're full. You can overeat. It's not going to cause increase in the disease rate. It actually will cause a decrease in your disease rate. But when you increase your animal protein, then we have the corresponding disease problem and the higher rates of diabetes.
Doing that study with the cancer situation, that was all meat processed. That was meat, a meat protein and not a plant-based protein.
Right at first, it was a meat protein. And what they did is they started substituting with various kinds of protein, and they discovered that the proteins, the biology of proteins, they operate two different ways. So on the one hand, you have animal-based proteins. On the other hand, you have plant-based proteins. And the plant-based proteins promote better health at high, as you increase them, whereas the animal-based proteins cause increase in disease as they go up. So this is big stuff. So a whole food plant-based diet, one of the biggest things that people talk about when they talk to me about this, let's see, I need to advance my slide up here. Well, the advantages and disadvantages of...
Go back to one. At the bottom.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Down here at the bottom of this slide, it says protein. A lot of people talk to me, and one of the things they say was, where can I get my protein? How am I going to get my protein? They are stuck on this idea that we have to increase our protein. That's the myth from the 1960s that science has debunked. You don't have to worry about the protein, because if you eat a variety of plant-based proteins, plant-based foods, you're going to get adequate protein. A lot of people used to say, well, you have to get all your amino acids. And in science, we have learned that if you're eating a wide variety, if you're getting your 30 various plants that you need for the fiber content in a course of a week, you're going to have all of those essential amino acids that you need anyway. You don't have to worry about the quality of the protein. And there are multiple studies that have brought that out recently. So the whole food plant-based diet gives us between 60 and 80 grams of protein a day. 60 would be based on how much women eat. The 80 would be based on how much men eat. How much protein do you need, though? Well, look at the line just above that. Women need generally 46 on average grams of protein a day, and men need 56. So is 60 to 80 adequate to meet that need? The answer is a resounding yes. Now, maybe your body size isn't average, and you say, well, what's my particular need? Well, you can multiply 0.8 grams per kilogram per day, and you'll get exactly what your body needs, and that's what the dietitians will use. That's the number that they will use as they're calculating your particular dietary intake and your needs for various nutrients. So the advantages and disadvantages of a whole food plant-based diet. If you eat a whole food plant-based diet, you have higher consumption of nutrient-rich foods. And like I said before, when you increase the nutrient content in your food, your body will use those building blocks to make the cells heal. And so it becomes very protective also against developing insulin resistance. And you'll likely have improved weight loss. You'll have increased dietary fiber, which we learned how much we need that. And you'll have the absence of animal protein. There's an absence of heme iron. There's another subject we haven't gotten into. But you'll also have reduced serum lipid profile, and you'll have lower blood pressure and A1C. The big worry that most people have is vitamin B12 deficiency. And they say, well, you can on a prolonged vegan type diet develop B12 deficiency. But when, if that's a concern of yours, take a B12 supplement. Really, when you look at population studies, though, of B12, deficiency in the people that are vegan versus those that eat the regular carnivorous diet. What you find out is virtually the rate of pernicious anemia is just about the same. So it's not really a big concern. Part of that is probably because some of the bacteria that grow in the intestines can produce B12, but
Need to start eating more nutritional yeast. That's where you get that.
you can get some of it from yes, you can get some of it from that source. Absolutely, he's saying eat more nutritional yeast. So let's go to this now on page. What is it, 19, 18? 18 of your book. You have a food choice list. And by this time, I imagine most of you saying, well, what can I eat? Well, we want to go over this little list, but you'll notice that the green arrow, foods are, you've seen this list in two different forms already, but now we're getting down really to the concept of nutrition and food. And as we look at the green end of the arrow, those are foods that are more healing. They're anti-inflammatory. Down at the bottom, those foods are foods that tend to be more inflammatory. They're disease promoting. And so look and see where in these food categories do I find myself. And the way Karen and I use this, it's a decision-making tool. It doesn't have all of the foods there, but it is categorized the food according to categories. And it's based on numerical numbers. This was based on Dr. Joel Furman's aggregate nutrient density index. And I took his numbers and I ran all the numbers, and then I put them in categories and arranged the things in these categories. And so as the higher nutrients per calorie that you get is how these things were put together. And then we adjusted it just a little bit based on a study from Harvard University that talked about inflammatory foods. And so, for instance, the top of the list will be the highest nutrient density foods. So what is the category you're seeing there?
Green leafy vegetables.
Oh yes, green leafy vegetables. And within each category, the foods are in descending order from the highest to the lowest. So there are 5 foods that have a score of 1,000. That's the highest you can have on the score of these foods. And I think they're turnip greens. Well, what's the first green that's there? Collards?
Kale.
Kale. Okay, so you have kale, collards, turnip greens, Swiss chard is next. Well, let's see. It might be Swiss chard and then watercress is not on the list, but those are the 5 foods I think that have an Andy score of 1,000. So the most nutrient dense foods: kale, collards, turnip greens, mustard. It is. Excuse me, not the Swiss chard. It's mustard and watercress.
If you have a spring that grows watercress, it's good water.
Oh, yes, that's an interesting observation. He says, if you have a spring that grows watercress, it's good water. That's great. And indeed it would be. Okay, now how many of you have heard that iceberg lettuce doesn't have any nutrition?
Yeah, it's wimpy.
Yeah. Well, it's a common myth that's out there. Iceberg lettuce has an Andy score of 128. Now I want you to look across the page, and there's a graph there. You'll notice the bar that runs right along the top. Excuse me, I hit the... There we go. The bar that runs right along the top. So your kale and mustard and collards are going to be clear over here on the far side at the score of 1,000. Iceberg lettuce is going to be the other end of that bar. Now, 128, I want you to look and see how it stacks up with other food groups.
It's still better than
Oh yeah, iceberg lettuce is going to help you reverse your diabetes. So don't feel guilty when you sit down to a salad that has iceberg lettuce in it, because nutrients per calorie is going to help. It's going to feed your cells. Is it the best you can do?
No.
No, you could eat better by going to the other end of the scale, doing the kale and collards, but I still don't have a beef with iceberg lettuce. Okay? Now look at fruits, for instance. What's the highest fruit that's there? Cranberries. And then what do you have next? Strawberries and blackberries and raspberries and blueberries. Those are nice, high foods, and they're great foods for people with diabetes. Now look at the other end of the list. What's the tail end of that list on fruits? A banana. Okay? Banana has an Andy score of 9. And the riper it is, the higher the score goes. So, people with diabetes, we tell you make a serving size is half a banana, and you should eat them when there's still a little green on the peel. If it gets spots on it, it's too ripe.
Steve, wouldn't it be that has a lower score because it's riper and it's sweeter?
Yes, you're right. You're right. It has a lower score as it ripens. So anyway, because it gets sweeter. So
Sugar content goes up, right?
sugar content does go up, yes.
So eat your banana with a little bit of green on it. That's my choice.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so when we introduce this to people, there's several other things we want you to know. I was introducing this to a group in another state. I won't tell exactly where. But it was in another state, and we were going over the list like this. And so I was looking for where can we find some good food on our list? And we had a big group. And so I said, what did you have for breakfast this morning? What did you all have for breakfast?
Yogurt, granola, and chia seeds.
Yogurt, granola. You had good food. So where's yogurt on here? Yogurt. It's going to be under cheese and dairy. Right there, the top of the red. Okay. All right. What else did someone have this morning? She had chia seeds. Seeds, that's up here up in the green. Good. Okay. Whole grain hot cereal. Well, good. Well, what I heard from my group, I had a little man right here, and he said, I had a bologna sandwich. Well, where's bologna sandwich going to be?
Processed meats.
It's a processed meat way at the bottom, and he probably had it on white bread, which is right above that under refined grains. So I said, well, what did you have yesterday for breakfast? I was hoping somebody would say oatmeal so that we could look at our grains up here.
We had oatmeal this morning.
Oh, good for you. They had oatmeal this morning. Well, my little man spoke up and he said, I had a fried bologna sandwich. Well, if you look way at the bottom on that list with your red and green arrow, it says, if food has been processed, decrease it by 2 categories. But if the food has been fried, decrease it by 4 categories. Well, if he's already eating down here,
He's off the charts.
so I said, so where do you see yourself on this food list? And he said, I'm skipping along the bottom. Yes. So what we encourage you to do is just simply use this as a tool. Figure out where you are, and then can you move up some? Steve and I had to do that. We were eating a lot down, lower. And so we have worked to get up and have better nutrition in our home, and it's really made a difference for us.
Thank you very much. Yes, it has made a huge difference. The landscape of our kitchen looks nothing like what it did when we first started out learning this stuff. And yeah. So T. Colin Campbell, at the end of his life, said that he had made the observation.
He's still alive.
Yes, he is. Excuse me, yes, he is still alive.
Just
But-
had his 91st birthday this week.
Oh, really? Okay, 91st birthday this week, she says. He said he observed that the people who ate the most animal-based food got the most chronic disease. And the people who ate the most plant-based foods were the healthiest and tended to avoid chronic disease. He said these results cannot be ignored. So that's a pretty profound statement, if you ask me. So next week we're going to be talking about augmenting diabetes reversal. Now, augment means to make greater by adding things to it. So you know a lot of the basics, but are there things that we can add to what we're already doing to make diabetes reversal better? And so that's our topic next week. And I have just the closing thought here before we get into our table discussions. It comes from Deuteronomy 7:15. It says, "And the Lord will take away from thee all sickness, and will put none of the evil diseases of Egypt, which thou knowest, upon thee." So he said that to the children of Israel when they were in the Exodus, coming out, wandering in the wilderness, and whatever else. The Lord will take away from thee all sickness. So it's God that does the healing. We do our best to cooperate with the laws of nature, but God does the healing. So put the right stuff where it belongs. Now let's talk about what we're going to do in our coaching session in just a few minutes. I want you to discuss your feelings about today's protein lecture. I realize I probably stepped on a lot of toes, and I'm sorry, but I wanted to tell you the truth. I think you deserve to know the truth.
I needed a kick in the rear end.
Well, I think, she says I needed a kick in the rear end. I think you just got one. I'm sorry to be the one that delivered it, but anyway. So I'd like for you to write out a list of foods that you can substitute in your home for animal-based proteins with your meals, things that will work for you. And then using the food choice list and the food choice graph, those two graphs that we just looked at and that Karen went over with us, I want you to use those to plan a whole food plant-based meal that is high on the chart. So we've done this a number of times since we studied this out and developed this, and it just gets better. And then use your smartphone to look up a whole food plant-based entree and build your meal around that. Okay? Then you can write out a goal of which protein foods that you will eat this week, or what kind of protein foods you will eat this week. And go ahead and come on up. Let's do our drawing, and then we'll go to our exercise segment. For those of you that are online, thank you for watching once again.